There's college football on TV. Folks are getting excited about pumpkin spice, and Karen wants the whole family to get together and go for a hayride. But you are smart enough to weasel out of all of that because you know this is one of the best times of the year to hit the river and go fly fishing. You'll find great hatches, willing fish, and fall is a fantastic time to start hunting for your new personal best. You've just got to get over a few of the hurdles that fall fly fishing will throw at you. This week on Untangled, I'll share 4 tactics that'll help you crack the code during autumn. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Hope you're doing well this week. I'm about to embark on a little journey, remodeling the house that we've lived in and have been remodeling for 3 years now, so it's finally getting done. But don't worry, Untangled will continue to come out as scheduled. Neither rain, nor sleet, nor snow, nor nuclear war will ever stop Untangled from coming out. I mean, if that ever happens, we'll just go ahead and broadcast on ham radio. So, now that I think about it, you might want to add a ham radio to your pile of essential fly fishing gear just so you never miss the show, should something terrible like that happen. No, it's not going to happen. Hey, let's move on to something a whole lot more pleasant, which is fall fly fishing. Now, I know I say this about every season, but fall really is a great time to be on the water. I mean, is there really a bad time to be on the water? Maybe the only bad time to be out fishing is when you're supposed to be somewhere doing something else. But if you're supposed to be doing something other than fishing, is it even really worth doing? All right, we'll lay the philosophy aside, and I'll get to it. I'll get to the meat and potatoes, what we expected here. I know y'all don't tune in for philosophizing, although maybe that should be a spinoff at some point. Anyways, I'm going to share a few tips and tactics today to help you get the most out of your fall fly fishing, and I'm going to do this by telling a little story. So just like what we did with last week's show, all about fighting fish, where I told you the story, then we went through it. I'm going to tell a story that shows almost all the tactics that I'm talking about, and then we'll revisit each of them in greater detail. So it was a couple of years ago, so 3 years ago, right after we moved to this house that we're in now. And I was up exploring some of the streams and the mountains right behind the house. And this was my first fall on this water. So it was all really new to me. I didn't have my bearings. It was all fresh and exciting, and I was still learning the character of the rivers. I was still starting to understand how they act in the different seasons, how the fish react to things, what the bug life was like. And it was late September. It was just before elk season opened. And I remember that because I was supposed to be up scouting for elk, but the river looked way too good to ignore. So I ended up fishing for a minute. But it's this little creek's up at about 9,000 feet. So it's definitely fall up there. I park, I ignore the elk mission, and I set up shop in this little section of this spring creek that I love. It's full of big cutthroat. I've talked about this creek a lot. It's really, really fun to fish. And it was probably 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And for a few hours, I could do no wrong. It was one of those days when every cast you throw is great, all your drifts are drag free, and the fish were basically throwing themselves at my fly. I didn't even really have to try. And that's nothing to brag about my skill as an angler. It's just, you have those days sometimes where it's like, oh, I'm the greatest angler who ever lived. And then you follow it up the very next day with a giant goose egg or something, and it humbles you right back. But it was one of those days where really, I tied on a size 16 parachute Adams with a size 18 zebra midge dropper, and I ran that rig through every riffle in the river, and the fish were just stacked. They were in the riffles. They were munching. There wasn't much of a hatch coming off, but the fish were very clearly in the riffles. There must have been bug life in the riffles because that's where the fish were, and it was, I lost track of how many fish I caught. Nice fish, just having a banner day, the kind of day that you're going to tell your grandkids about at some some far distant future. Well, back in my day, the fish practically threw themselves at my fly. It was one of those days. And then it's 5 or 6 in the afternoon. I'm thinking, man, I really should go look for some elk. And the fishing just shut off, like someone flipped a switch. It was really weird, too, because that's right when I started to see the beginnings of a more consistent hatch coming off. It's a little smaller mayflies coming off, and they were tricos, which is the smallest of the mayfly family, and Alex's favorite fly ever. If you ever meet Alex in real life, who runs VFC Media with me here, if you ever meet him in real life, just ask him what his favorite fly is. He will love to tell you all about the tricos. Anyways, so I see these tricos coming off. I quit catching fish. I see the tricos, and so I rigged up with a trico pattern, but the fish still weren't eating them. I was casting the riffles, and the fish just had nothing to do with it. It went from amazing to awful within 10 minutes. It just shut off. And that is when I actually come around the corner, and I saw this big pool, and it's got this big rush of current going into the middle of it, and then a nice seam on either side, and then tons of dead water against either bank. And there were fish that were steadily rising in that dead water, real tight up against the banks. So I set up shop in this pool, and I started casting to those rising fish, and I caught a few. It wasn't as fast and furious as it was earlier, but I caught a few on that little trico. I kept moving upriver as the sun was setting, and at this point, I had switched to a pretty small trico pattern. I think it was a 22 or a 24. It was not a very big fly. And I was about out of daylight, I knew I wasn't going to scout any elk. I was just going to head home. But I come up to one more spot. There was this really nice fish. It was rising in the tiniest, and I mean tiniest, pocket imaginable, right next to the bank. There was this big set of riffles, and then a little grassy bank that jutted out, and there was maybe a 1 square foot of water that this fish was rising in. It was just this calm little pocket right next to the bank. And it was on the other side of the riffles. I knew I couldn't get too close so that I could just high stick my line through it, because the water was so low and clear that if I got too close, I was going to spook the fish. So I needed to be stealthy about this. And I ended up crouching down and moving upriver just slightly so that I could throw a reach cast, let my fly land in that pocket, and drift for maybe 3 seconds before the riffles would yank it out. So I'd get a little bit of a good drift, and I probably had 1 or 2 chances at doing that before the fish would wise up to the fact that that was not a real fly. And I ended up doing it what felt like 100 times because the fish didn't spook. Even though after 2 or 3 seconds, my trico would jet out of there like it was on a jet ski, because the current would just grab my line and pull. Because again, I couldn't get too close to high stick through there because the water was so low and clear. And I just kept doing it. And finally, after what feels like 100 presentations, I ended up hooking that fish. It ate my fly. It comes up, it smacks it, and I set the hook just a little too early and broke the tippet off. And on that terrible ending, I walked back to the truck in almost dark, and I was questioning my abilities as an angler, as a husband, as a human being in general. If I couldn't stick that fish, then what was the point of fishing at all? Yeah, existentialism aside, let's go ahead and dissect some of the points in that story, aside from not catching the nice one at the very end, that are key to successful fall fly fishing.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you're anything like me, you don't want to spend half your fishing day fiddling with knots and tangles, or waste precious time switching from rig to rig. That's why we put together our Rigs and Knots Pocket Guide. It's a simple downloadable PDF that you can either memorize or take with you to the river. It shows you exactly how to set up proven rigs and what knots to use, so you can spend less time fumbling with your gear and more time fishing. Snag a free copy by scanning the QR code on the screen or hit the link in the show notes. All right, back to Untangled.
There's 4 of these key skills that really stand out to me. And the first one is that you've got to follow the bugs. And what I mean by that is during the fall, the bugs, the aquatic insect life, is going to be the most active during the warmest part of the day. So the mornings and evenings during the fall, they get really cold. And when that happens, the water temps in the rivers cool down significantly. As that happens, the bug activity slows down significantly. So early and late in the days, that's when you're going to find the fish stacked in the pools, in the really deep runs, because the bugs aren't terribly active in the riffles. There's no reason for the fish to stay in the riffles if there's not a lot of food. They're going to go back to the pools. They're going to hang out. That's where the most easily available food is when the water cools down quite a bit. That's why you find fish stacked in the deep water during winter, because there's nothing hatching other than midges, and they're just going to hang out in the pools where they spend the least amount of energy for the most amount of food. So they do this on a much smaller scale in the fall because, again, when the water's not warm enough for the bugs to be active, why are they going to spend their time swimming in a riffle when they can hang out in a pool and spend way less energy? So they're going to be hanging out in those pools until the day warms up, because then the water is going to warm up as well. And that's when the insects in the riffles, your midges, your mayflies, and a few caddis that hatch in the fall, that's when they're going to start moving around. They're going to start being active. So the fish are going to follow the bugs to the riffles. They're going to go where all the food is so they can eat as much as possible. They'll hang out there until the evening. And then again, they'll make their way back to those pools. So when I pulled up to this little river, it was middle of the afternoon. The water was just about at its warmest. And the fish were in the riffles to stuffing their faces like me at a buffet. It was almost that embarrassing. But once the bugs stopped in the riffles, once the buffet manager came out and cut the fish off, said, "No more." Which I've been cut off at a buffet before, in that I don't know whether to wear that as a badge of honor or humiliation, but I'm going to wear it as honor. All right. And if that's not the most American thing that you've ever heard, then dadgummit, I don't know what else to tell you. But the fish were, they shut off in those riffles, right? They went right back to the pools though, and they kept eating the trichos in the pools, because that's where the trichos were really hatching. They could spend the least amount of energy, still eat a lot of food, but they didn't have to waste all their time in the riffles on those trichos. So that's skill number one. You've got to make sure that you're following the bugs, paying attention to how the fish are reacting to it, because where the bugs are is where the fish are going to be too. Skill number two, and this is one that's kind of hard to make the switch, but this is, you've got to get comfortable with small flies in the fall. And it's really hard to make the switch because we've been fishing big foam bugs all summer. We've been, ants, hoppers, beetles. We've been having fun with the big bugs. But then fall comes and it's almost an abrupt change in feeding habits. It's like one day they wake up and say, "Okay, we're done. We want the little stuff again." And they really do start to dial in on the smaller insects. But that's because small flies are back on the menu. Okay. I started out with a size 16 parachute Adams and a size 18 zebra midge on my rig that fall day on this little creek, which the size 16 is not too small. The 18 is getting small. But then I switched to keep catching fish once they started eating those trichos, those tiny mayflies. I switched to either a 22 or a 24, however small it was. It was tiny, is the point. And the only exception that you're going to find to this rule with small flies in fall is the October caddis. The October caddis is a large, bright orange caddis that comes off during the fall, and they can be pretty big. But they're really the only big bug that's left. So if the fish are eating the October caddis, it's very obvious that that's what they're snacking on. You can fish those big ones on top. But when the fish are keyed in on insects, when that's what they're wanting to eat during the fall, it does pay to fish a lot of your smaller size 18 and 20 pheasant tails, your hare's ears, any of your other go-to midge and mayfly nymphs. It's just like fishing in the spring. When the bugs are really small, your biggest bugs, whether it's midges or mayflies, do tend to happen in the summer, and then spring and fall is when they're going to be smaller. So it's just the natural order of things. You've got to size down a little bit once you come to fall. But this actually leads us right into skill number 3, which is a little paradoxical to skill number 2, but that is the streamer game. Okay, you've got to understand the streamer game. This is the only thing I didn't do during this day on the creek, but I can't talk about fall fly fishing and not bring up streamers. So Fall is one of the best time to fish streamers. I love fall streamer fishing, and that's because fall is the time when some trout, like your brown trout, start spawning. So they're going to be very aggressive. They are very willing to chase down just about anything that comes too close when they're getting ready for a little trout business. They're not happy to see any streamer get too close to them. And it's also the time that fish, all the fish in the river, are going to start packing on the pounds for winter. They'll eat as much as they can to bulk up for the coldest part of the year because they know they need all that fat to survive. And that's going to make all the fish in the river, a lot more apt to eat a streamer. So you can get a lot of aggressive takes, a lot of fun, flashy fights on the streamer during fall. It really is best to fish them on overcast days, and usually starting from about mid-morning on. You want the water to warm up just a little bit so that the fish are active. Because when that water cools down a little too much, the fish's metabolism, listen to me, I can't even talk, and that's what I do for a living. The fish's metabolism slows down just a hair as well. It'll really slow down come winter, but once the water starts to cool off, the fish don't eat as much. So you got to wait for that water to warm up just a smidge so that they'll really give chase to these big streamers. I really focus on fishing my streamers during the fall very tight to the bank. I want them right there. There's usually a lot of cover. That's where I find a lot of success with my streamer fishing. But I'll land them very tight to the bank, and then I will strip them back towards usually the middle of the river because I'm often fishing my streamers from a drift boat. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and cast perpendicular to the bank and then just strip them back towards the boat. So the streamer's cutting through the current. It's coming back towards the middle of the river. But you can go ahead and do that same presentation just waiting. You can cast directly across the current if you've got the room for it. You can wait out. Since the rivers tend to be a lot lower and clearer during fall, you can wait out a little bit further and just pound the banks with those streamers and then pull them through the current, pull them through some of that deeper water, the deeper runs, the pools. Really focus on that water where the fish can hold, transition points, depth changes, anywhere that they can hang out and ambush prey. The trout are going to love that, and they're going to show you that love with your streamer. I do like to use a sink tip line to help my streamers get down because, again, you do want to fish these in those deeper runs and pools if the bugs aren't too active. I would highly recommend, if you're going to dedicate time to it, I would highly recommend getting a sink tip line. You could also use a Versa leader or a poly leader, which functions basically the same. It's just this weighted piece of leader that basically turns your floating line into a sink tip fly line. So that's an option for you as well, but it helps to get those flies nice and deep. So you're just skimming along the bottom, putting them right in front of where the fish are hanging out. And that leads us to tip number 4, which is stealth. So this is a skill that's really important. I've mentioned a couple of times during the story that the water is really low and clear. And that's a big difference you're going to notice in the fall from the summer, is that the water is low. It is a trickle at this time of year. All the rainfall is used up. The springs are running low. It needs winter to recharge. So the water's clear. And when it gets clear, it gets very low as well. That means the fish can see everything. And you need to be very stealthy in your approach if you want to catch as many fish as possible. So in some places, that might mean you've got to crouch, or even, sometimes I will even army crawl into position because you've got to stay out of the fish's sight lines. If you just walk up to the river like normal and you're this big silhouette that's moving on the horizon, fish see that and they will just spook and get out of there super quick. So you've got to stay low. Crouching really pays off. If you watch any of our videos of how we fish, a new video series we started this year here at VFC, you'll see both Alex and I make good use of that. We'll crouch quite often when we need to just sneak, just get a little closer to make those casts. So that's one way to stay stealthy. Another option you've got to increase your stealth is that you can cast from further away, but that means you're going to need a longer leader. So you don't want your fly line slapping the water super close to where these fish are. So if you lengthen your leader, that means the leader is what's hitting the water instead. And that makes just a lot less disturbance on the water. It's going to spook the fish significantly less. And fall is really the only time of year when I'll bust out the 12 and 15 foot leaders, especially if the fish are eating dry flies, because you don't want that fly line to smack too close to the rising fish. You want to give yourself a distance so you can stay as far back from them as possible so they don't see you, so they don't spook. It's this cat and mouse game, and some days you'll end up fishing a leader that feels like it's way too long, but that's what the fish need in order for you to get close or for you to make a cast without spooking them. And last fall, on one of the local tailwaters, we saw this a bunch where the fish just got super picky. If I got too close, and by too close, I mean if I got within 30 feet of them, they would just quit rising. So I had to stand way far back. I had to make these ridiculously long casts, and I had like a 16-foot leader on at one point just to get these drifts where they needed to be. I sized my tippet down. This is one of the times a year when I will size my tippet down past 5X. I'll go to 6 at this point in the year because sometimes you just need a little bit thinner tippet to make just a slightly more delicate presentation on the water so you're not spooking those fish. That's an extreme example. Usually it's not that crazy, but if you're having a hard time, you're getting close to the fish and they're spooking, or your fly line is landing too close to the fish and it's spooking them, add some length to your leader, and that's really going to make a difference in your ability to reach out and touch those fish. So you thought that was the end because I said 4 tips, huh? No, I've got a bonus tip for y'all. Now, it didn't fit in the story, but I can't really talk about fall fly fishing if I don't bring up the last skill, and that is you've got to use egg patterns. Use some egged flies. So your brown or your brook trout are going to be the main trout species that spawn during the fall. There's other trout that do it as well, but your browns and your brooks are what you're most commonly going to run into. And when they spawn, what they're going to do is they're going to create this nest in the river, and it's called a red. A red is just a cleaned off, very, very bright, bowl-shaped section of gravel right on the riverbed. It's often located in shallower water. So it's really easy to tell them because they'll be super clean. There won't be any moss on the rocks, and it'll be dug out like this little bowl. And that is where they end up laying their eggs, which will hatch into the next generation of trout. So it's incredibly important when you see these reds or you see fish on those reds, you do not bother them. Don't fish to the fish that are spawning. If they are on the reds, leave them alone. Let them do their thing. Let them make more fish for us to catch next year. And it's also important to not step on the reds, because if you step on them, you can crush those eggs, and then those fish never have a chance to hatch and grow into maybe that 25-inch brown that we're all chasing, or whatever our big dream fish is. So make sure you do not cast to spawning fish. You leave the reds alone. Give them a nice wide berth. But it's good when they're spawning because not every egg makes it into the red. Sometimes they'll get kicked loose and they'll drift down the river. And not every fish in the river is spawning during the fall. A good example is if you've got a river with brown trout and rainbows in it, which a lot of our trout rivers do, the browns will be spawning this time of year, and the rainbows, they're not spawning, but they know that brown trout eggs are on the menu. So they're going to set up shop in the deeper runs, in the pools, and they will very happily eat any egg pattern drifted through there because it's a super high protein meal. They recognize them. It's kind of like a limited time deal for them because they know there's not a ton of eggs in the river system for too long. So they really will get pretty aggressive with them, and most fish will recognize it. So as long, again, as you're not bugging the spawning fish, you leave them alone. You fish areas that don't have any reds in them. You're fishing those deeper runs and those pools. Drift an egg pattern through there in the fall sometimes, and that can really, you can have some really good, fun, exciting days. And that's where our egg bomber here at VFC came from. It's something that you can use during the fall, and then again in the spring when fish start spawning then. So that does wrap up our fall fly fishing extravaganza. If there are any other fall fly fishing tips that you'd like to share with us, or one that you think I missed, please drop that in the comments. I'd love to see what all else is out there, what other great advice this community's got for us. But now it is time to move on to the Q&A section of this week's show. Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, you can send those in to us. There is a link to do that in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And please keep these questions coming. I love to see what y'all are struggling with, what questions are and roadblocks are in your way right now. That helps us craft the absolute best content for y'all so that we can help you live real life and have those amazing days out on the water. So do not hesitate to send those questions on in. Rob from Alberta has our first question this week, writes in and says, I fish year-round, and during the summer, the dry fly fishing doesn't really pick up until dusk. As I'm getting older, it's becoming tougher to see my dry flies in low light. What are your thoughts on using a strike indicator with dry flies? The technique doesn't sit right with me, but with moving water and limited visibility, I'm not sure how else to tell if I'm getting a take. Love the podcast. Thank you. Rob, thank you. And this is a good question. I'm not sure how long you've been fly fishing. You didn't mention it there, but I do promise that spotting your flies does become easier the more and more you fly fish. It's a skill just like anything else in this sport. It's something that you learn and get more familiar with. I'm certainly not discounting the fact that when you get older, you do have a harder time seeing those flies out there. I've got a few fishing buddies who are in that stage right now. But spotting flies is definitely a skill that you can develop. It's something you'll just get better at the more and more you do it. But to directly answer your question, a strike indicator above your dry flies can work, but it is going to mess with your drift. That indicator can pull on the leader a little bit. It can pull the flies down a little bit. And especially this time of year when the water is so low and clear, the fish are going to see that bobber. It's going to hit the water hard. It's not going to land naturally like a dry fly would. And it's so close to the rest of your dry flies that it's going to spook fish. It's really just a dead giveaway that your flies aren't real. So I'm sure there are some folks out there who vehemently disagree with me on this, but I would not put a bobber on my dry fly rig at all because it's going to negatively impact how real those flies look. And your job is to put flies in front of fish and make them look real. So you don't want to add the indicator to that dry fly rig. One stopgap option you could use is a pinch-on foam indicator. These are really small. They just pinch onto your leader. They float super high since they're made out of foam. They don't land with a splash. They hardly make any noise on the water at all. They're really not all that big, though, so they might not be as easy to see. In fact, a lot of dry flies are bigger than a lot of these little foam indicators, but it might be worth a shot. Maybe just that little tag that they create on the line will be something that is easier for you to see. Another option you've got is you can tie your flies with really bright posts in them, and it doesn't have to be a parachute fly for you to stick that post in there. You could use pink, yellow, orange, whatever color of Antron yarn that you like. We actually tie all of our Griffiths gnats here at VFC, which you can buy in 3-packs, by the way. We've got those for sale now. But we tie the Griffiths gnats with a bright pink post in it, exactly for that reason, because it's a small fly. It's tough to see, and that bright pink helps it stand out on the water, especially in those low light conditions. One trick, though, that has helped me develop the ability to spot those smaller flies is that I'll go ahead and I'll follow my leader from where it joins my fly line, and I'll just follow the leader up until I either see the fly or I see where the fly should be. So when my fly line lands, when everything lands on the water, you can see where your leader and your line meet, and then just follow that leader line up. You can usually see the leader shine. It might be coiled up. It's not landing completely straight, right? You can usually follow that up to where you think your dry fly is. And then often you'll find it. You will be able to find it once you do that. This is another skill that you can develop, but it's usually pretty easy to just follow that leader and find the dry fly. So I wouldn't worry too much about it in terms of it not getting better, because I do think it's a skill you can develop. So I would keep at it, but definitely try a couple of these other options and see if they help you out. So thank you so much for the question. Jack from Colorado's got our next question. Writes in and says, when I was walking up to a small river in the mountains, I noticed all these tiny green hoppers. I didn't have any like that in my fly boxes. I tied on a size 12 brown hopper and the brook trout still smacked it. I also never saw any caddis, but they still smacked the elk hair caddis. Do you have any idea why they ate them, or were they brook trout being brook trout? Jack, this is a good question. You really did kind of hit it on the head, though. Brook trout have a reputation for being voracious eaters, especially the smaller ones in streams. They really will eat just about anything they can get their mouths around. And that's actually due to their unique life history of where they evolved. Because your brook trout are native to the eastern coast of the U.S. and then all the way up that coastline into Canada. And especially in those high elevation streams, and then when you get up into Canada, the growing season's really short, and there's not a ton of bug life in a lot of those streams. So the brook trout, when they had the chance to eat, they developed that instinct to eat as much as they could and just stuff as much food as they could, because they never knew maybe when their next meal was going to come from. The streams were kind of barren compared to a lot of the other streams where your rainbow trout originate from, or a lot of our other streams just here in the country. There just wasn't as much food, so they developed that instinct to go ahead and eat a lot and to frequently eat as much as they could. So that is part of their behavior, is they'll just go ahead and smack as much food as they can get their mouths around. And then once we transplanted the brookies from the East Coast, we brought them out here to the West, where we've got rivers and streams and lakes with a lot more food than a lot of their natural habitat, their native habitat. They kept that part of their behavior, and they'll actually eat so much they'll stunt. They'll reproduce and eat so much that they eat themselves out of house and home, and you end up with a lake or a river full of 9-inch brook trout because there's just not enough food to go around for all of them anymore. So what you'll find is that as long as you get a good drift with your fly and it looks real, if there's brook trout in the stream, there's a very good chance they're going to go ahead and eat that fly. Now, the brookies that get very large in the lakes here in the West and elsewhere, they can be really picky when they get very big. But the ones living in streams, they really do have that penchant for eating just about anything that you want to throw their way, as long as it's within reason. Not some crazy off-the-wall bug, but something within reason. So that behavior also holds true for just about any fish in high elevation streams, whether it's brookies, cutthroat, whatever. In fact, I've got this little stream not too far from where I live. It's up at just over 9,000 feet, I think, above sea level. It's got brown trout, rainbows, and brookies in it. And all of those fish, they do the same thing. They throw themselves at any well-presented fly. Now, sometimes they'll get picky. In fact, last week I was up there, and there was a small mayfly hatch coming off, and I'd tied a caddis on before I even got to the river. So I got to the river, saw the mayfly hatch was on, and thought, they'll still eat the caddis. And they did, but I would have had a lot more fish if I'd put the mayfly on. But even when there's that hatch, they're still going to eat it so long as it looks real. And that's part of what makes some of this small stream fishing so rewarding, is that you get a good drift, put that fly in front of a fish, and make it look real, and the trout are going to reward you. And sometimes that's all you need, is just a day of a bunch of fish. Even if they're all smaller, it's still a lot of fun. So hopefully that answers your question about brook trout. Thanks for sending it on in. Keith from Oregon has our next question, writes in and says, I've been practicing casting in the yard using a bit of yarn tied to the leader, having trouble with the yarn hitting and tangling at the tip of the rod. Studying at YouTube U, I've seen the following tip in several videos. The fly follows the rod, and stop the rod sharply at the end of each casting stroke. Together, don't those lead to the exact problem I'm having? The fly running into the tip of the rod? What am I missing? Thanks for all of your help at VFC. Keith, thank you. Appreciate it. Without seeing you cast in person, it's hard to diagnose exactly what the problem is, but I'm gonna give it a shot anyways for you, man. I got you. In my experience, if you are hitting the tip of the rod with your leader and your tippet, and that yarn that you've tied on to help you see where it's landing so you can practice casting accuracy, what that usually means is that you're not waiting long enough before starting your next casting stroke, whether it's the front or the back one. You're just not waiting long enough. When you don't let the line straighten out completely during the casting stroke before moving on to the next casting stroke, you're going to end up with line that smacks into itself, and that's going to hit the tip of the rod sometimes as well. And that's because the loops of line that you're making in the air with your fly cast, they're not opening wide enough. If you don't let them fully straighten out in front of and behind you, they're not open wide enough to carry the leader and the yarn that you've tied onto it in place of your fly up high. Instead, those loops are collapsing. They're falling back down onto themselves. They're creating all kinds of tangles. So the fix is pretty easy. You're going to go ahead and don't start your cast. Don't start your next casting stroke until the line is completely straightened out. So if you're casting, you bring the rod forward, wait until that line straightens out all the way, and then go ahead and move to the back casting stroke. Eventually, you're going to get a feel for this. You will know what it feels like when the line is straightened out. You won't have to watch every casting stroke, but until you've built that muscle memory, I want you to watch the cast on the forward and the back cast. So cast forward, watch it, and then just turn your head and watch as it goes behind you. Don't move your fly rod forward from that back cast. Don't move it forward until your line straightens out completely. And then when you do, remember, you've got to keep that abrupt stop on both ends of the casting stroke. That's really going to help the energy transfer and those loops unfurl nicely and drop with accuracy right where you want them to. That to me sounds like the issue is just a timing problem. And I'd venture to say probably 95% of casting issues are related to timing. You're either waiting too long or you're not waiting long enough. And in this case, I think you're not waiting long enough. Let those loops straighten out, move on to the next part of the casting stroke, and you should be in business. So I hope that helps. And that wraps up the Q&A section for the show this week. But don't go anywhere, folks, because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and pictures and sometimes even videos if you send them in of you out there on the water living real life. Love to see and hear about what y'all are up to. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to share, there is a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Andrew, writes in and says, "My son turned 4 in October. He always wants to do whatever his dad is doing. He always watched me fly fish while fishing with his push-button Zebco. For 2 years, he kept asking for a fly rod. Finally, after what felt like 250,000 asks, I gave in. Although I was not yet ready to part with my eyesight due to a rogue fly. When he received the fly rod, we made a deal that he had to practice in the yard first before touching the water. He agreed, and he kept his promise and practiced until he was ready to hit the water. He was very excited to put on his thermal gear and waders. In New England, the waters are very cold in the winter. He fished about 2 hours on New Year's Eve. He had so much fun he didn't realize how cold it was. Neither of us caught a thing, but to see the look on his face and the fun he had was worth 100 times the price of the rod. Thanks for all that you do at VFC Tight Lines." Andrew, that's a great story. Oh, those freezing days, even when you don't catch anything, there's something makes you feel alive about being out on days like that, isn't there? That's a really neat story, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up. Thank you so much for being here and listening and watching to the whole show. That helps us out more than you know. And if you want to help us out even more, tell everybody you know about Untangled. This is the best fly fishing show probably ever, right? So tell everybody about it. It's great because y'all make it great and y'all listen. That's why the show's so great. But please do tell folks about it. And make sure you rate and subscribe to us wherever you're listening. More ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life, which is the whole goal of what we're doing at VFC. We want you to have these unforgettable moments out there on the water. And speaking of being on the water, go out, get some fishing in, go experience some fall fly fishing, have some fun, and until next week, live real life.